Welcome again to the Law and You series for Law Week 2020. Great to have you with us. And today we're talking about a whole spectrum of issues that are managed by the Victoria Legal Aid, which of course is a very central point for legal assistance, and particularly at this time. So I'll introduce you in a moment to a number of the staff, senior staff at VLA, to talk about the sorts of responses that they're hearing from people who are contacting them, and also how they're responding to the changed circumstances that we're all in. But before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are talking to you and on which you are watching and or listening to this discussion, and pay my profound respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and thank them profoundly for their custodianship of this land through millennia. But let me introduce you now to, I think we have Leanne Sinclair from the Family Violence Response Team at VLA, Miles Browne from the Economic and Social Rights Team, and they look particularly at tenancy, infringement, social security, those sorts of issues. Brigid Jenkins, who's the manager of the Family Law Services, and Cashen too, who joins us as the Associate Director of Criminal Law. Now, this is going to be a challenge, people, because we haven't had such a high number of participants on one of these conversations before, but we will do our very best, and I appreciate your contributions very much indeed. Let's talk a little bit first about the sort of responses you're seeing coming through. Brigid, you work in the family law space.
That's correct.
And what sort of spike or increase or decrease perhaps have you seen coming through in terms of client interest?
We've seen an increase in our legal help and web chat functions in particular in terms of family law. We've seen an increase in calls in relation to concerns parents might have in terms of complying with any court orders, whether sending their children to spend time with the other parent, or concerns about the children being sent back from the other parent, and mainly concerns about the children. Are they safe with the other parent? Are they appropriately social distancing? Are they appropriately responding to the concerns in relation to the virus? And also we've had some calls from parents who are concerned the other parent will use this as a justification to not follow the arrangement or that's been agreed to, or the orders that's been ordered by the court. We've also had some concerns in more recent times, since the children have been homeschooled, about concerns about whether the other parent is following the homeschooling arrangements whilst they're in their care, and specific concerns about how either a parent or a child's health impacts about spending time with the other parent.
And is that a higher number of calls than you would have under normal circumstances? I should imagine it is.
We have had specific spike in calls in relation to the concerns about people either contravening court orders or not following them, or concerns about children not being returned from time. So there's been specifically, that's the issue that we've seen a specific rise in calls.
So Leanne, in the family violence environment, which is where you work, there's been an awful lot of public concern expressed about what we might see in terms of increased numbers of victims in this lockdown environment. But what are you actually hearing from your clients?
So at the moment, and since the COVID pandemic hit and there were directions made by the Magistrates Court to stay at home, we received an influx of calls to our telephone legal help service asking about whether or not a person needed to attend court, will their matter still be heard by the courts, and what they should do to progress their legal matter. And so we were really telling people that legal services are still open, that people are available to provide them with assistance despite the stay-at-home messaging, and that they should try and contact legal help or their local community legal service to get legal help as soon as possible, and that we can then connect them to the duty lawyer services who can assist them, so that people can still get help with their family violence intervention order matters.
Are you seeing a spike
in family violence? We haven't directly seen a spike in family violence at the moment. We know that, and speaking with other family violence services, that initially there was a decline, especially in the number of people who are seeking protection or people who are experiencing family violence in making contact and trying to get help. And that could be because of the stay-at-home messaging, because people may be having to self-isolate at home. They might not be able to have the time and space to be able to contact professionals who can give them the help that they need.
So, Miles, you're in the economic environment with all sorts of issues around sort of financial distress, I suppose, coming through now with people losing jobs and being really uncertain around housing, for example, as well. What are you seeing coming through?
Yeah, it's been interesting and very difficult work. The Economic and Social Rights Program was conceptualised as a consolidation of services for people experiencing economic and social disadvantage, and I guess we never really anticipated such a profound change in economic circumstances en masse. So I think that the biggest impact currently, and I think it will change over time, has been, as you say, in the tenancy and housing space. We have seen large numbers of tenants trying to change their living environment and circumstances, either because they've lost their work, but also we've seen tenants or share houses with tenants trying to go home to other states to stay with family because they won't see them for 3 or 4 months. And obviously, if they don't have work here, it makes sense to be home with family. So that has meant that there's just been a lot of demand for kind of advice about what people's rights are at a time where, despite best efforts, I think the government has unfortunately created a lot of uncertainty. So a lot of the legal need has just really been around people trying to work out what they can do and not being really able to have a conversation with their landlord when landlords are also unaware of what until recently the government was planning to do to support tenants and landlords have those discussions. We've also seen impacts in our other practice areas. I think some of it arising from people being stuck at home. Particularly with our National Disability Insurance Scheme work, it's been really challenging to see families who are dependent on family, loved ones or people with disability getting out into the community, being unable for those family members to access supports, particularly with kids at home, not being able to access education supports. So I think hearing those stories has been, and trying to work through options with those clients has been immensely difficult.
I can imagine, and we'll talk a little further in a minute or two about what that looks like and how you're able to respond. But Alice, you work in the criminal law area at Victoria Legal Aid, and we've heard a great deal from the courts about changes to their practices and the fact that processes have slowed down, and there have been some delays mooted of months before cases come on. So what sort of bearing does that have on the clients that you deal with at VLA?
Yeah, so in the criminal law space, that's been the biggest change, is really the way that the courts are working and how we then respond in the way that we deliver our services. So as you said, and particularly in the Magistrates Court, a number of hearings have been adjourned and moved to later dates. And that means that some people don't need to go to court as early as they expected, so they'll be going later in the year. But it really depends on what type of matter you have and whether you're in custody. So there are some matters where we are still delivering services to people at court, so particularly for people who find themselves being arrested by police and are in custody, we are still delivering services in that space, and we are still also supporting the bail and remand court at the Melbourne Magistrates Court 7 days a week. So it's really how we deliver our services that has changed. So we're doing a lot more via the phone and via video conferencing, and we're also helping people to, I guess, navigate those changes and understand what it means for their matter. So there's some useful information that we've put up on the website, and of course people can still contact us through the usual channels, through the legal helpline in particular, to try and I guess understand what it means for them and still get the assistance that they need.
I mean, as you say, Alice, the slowdown in the courts will have some profound effects on people who are, you know, engaged in that system already. But I'm just wondering, given that we've heard about the reduction, for example, in presentations at emergency and for, you know, injury, has there also been a decline in the number of assaults or issues that might arise from, you know, drunken pub brawls and the like? Have we seen a decline in any criminal dimension?
I think anecdotally we are seeing or hearing about a decline, but it's a bit early, I think, to tell definitively at this stage. I think obviously people are spending less time in public spaces and in social spaces, but there's obviously a link to family violence and what's happening in people's private spaces as well. So it's a bit hard to say definitively at this stage how that will play out, I think.
Miles, are you seeing a different cohort coming through? Are the sorts of people who are contacting you a broader spectrum, perhaps, of people who may not have needed legal assistance before?
Look, we definitely are. Obviously, it's a broader cohort because it's people who, sorry, I'll go back a step. Our service is generally geared, particularly in the tenancy space, to people in social housing and also who are otherwise at risk of eviction. The fact of the matter is that those risks have now spread much more broadly in the community. So that need for urgent advice to prevent eviction has ramped up massively. And I think down the track as well, we have a social security practice. We're going to see a different array of people coming through to our social security practice for advice and assistance. So quite definitely it's going to change. But I also think, I think a third of Victorians rent. So when you have large scale changes in the law that affect a third of Victorians, you're going to see a demand that's much broader than you're used to.
So Leanne, the challenges in responding to clients who may not be able to get in touch with you in the normal ways that they do, the legal helpline or the phone call, if they're feeling under stress now or in danger, and that's not possible because they're locked down with somebody who might be abusive to them. How are you responding to that?
Yeah, so it was really concerning that we really did see a dramatic decline in calls to our service for people who were needing help with family violence. And like I said, that's probably because of the isolation messages. And then for people who were getting through to our service or who were contacting our reception to get help, they were calling in urgent situations. They were needing to have their matter and be able to get help right then and there. And that could be because they had a small pocket of time where they had the ability to make a call to legal help and to get assistance. And so in order to help them, we know that we have to make the best opportunity of a person who's calling to our service to get legal help and give them as much help as we can at that time. And so we're doing a number of initiatives at Victoria Legal Aid to prioritise calls for family violence legal help. So we'll be introducing a priority phone line, a press 2 for family violence assistance that will be added to the legal help queue. So that if a person calls seeking family violence assistance, they will be helped quicker than what would usually happen. We've also seen that many people, and especially people who are experiencing family violence, have been contacting us through our web chat facility. And that, again, that could be because they just aren't able to safely make a telephone call where they may be at home with the person who's alleged to be perpetrating family violence. So we'll be adding a priority channel to our web chat facility. And again, that's just with the intention of being able to help people as quickly as possible. And the third initiative we're taking is that we're rolling out additional training to our reception and our admin staff around safety messaging. We want to make sure that when calls are answered, that safety is the #1 priority and that a person can be informed of their referral options, their legal advice, and primarily how to keep them themselves safe at that very point in time.
Brigid, I imagine from what you've already described in terms of the family law space that the complexity is in a different category now, given that people can't fly interstate. They perhaps won't be able to move from regional parts to central Melbourne as easily as they might otherwise. So has that ramped up the demand on you and your team?
We have seen an increase in demand for family law advice. We've had, and in terms of complexity, we've also had in terms of how COVID's impacted upon it. As I said before, we've had specific concerns with health issues, but they've been very specific to the family and to the parents or the child. So it's not a simple sort of advice that you can give. You really have to sort of dive a little bit deeper into the complexity of the health issues or the concerns of the family. And all the children. So that's added an added layer of complexity in terms of our family law advice. We've also seen contact centres, for example. All the government contact centres have closed. So we've had an increase in calls in relation to parents who are having supervised their children. And we're having to think of ways to be creative in terms of ensuring that people maintain a relationship, but in a safe way with their children. So thinking about, are there family members who might be able to supervise? Is Skype appropriate? Or is there other ways that we can ensure the relationship is maintained? So there is definitely complexity at the moment in terms of giving that family law advice.
Absolutely. And Alice, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you're still providing services as you can in the courts. Is technology playing a part for you as well?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I think the courts have faced a pretty significant challenge in managing how to keep courts open and maintain that access to justice, but do so in a way that's consistent with the physical distancing requirements. So certainly we are using new technology. So for example, we're using phones and video conferencing devices to speak to people in custody a lot more rather than face-to-face interactions where we can. And I guess that's for the health and safety of everyone. But it's obviously some new challenges in everyone adapting to using that technology. Similarly, we're working through processes to support hearings online as well. I know that in other jurisdictions they've been used fairly frequently already, and that process is still rolling out in the Magistrates Court in particular. And I think one of the things for us that we're quite mindful of in that process is understanding how our clients experience those new processes and making sure that that's factored into how they're shaped and how we can improve them as they're sort of implemented over time, because ultimately, it goes to how people participate in the justice system and should help to minimise any sort of future contact with the justice system as well. That participation is pretty important.
Miles, what do you think we're learning about, in the broader sense, access to justice through this and the use of tech, I suppose, is the upside. And thank goodness we have the sorts of platforms that we do. But is there an element of this that will be useful down the track that we'll hang on to, do you think?
So certainly a reflection for our program has been the importance of coordination within the sector. So systems that are that work, but that work because clients, we have kind of various access points for clients stop working, I think, when clients are stuck at home and are doing things differently, so calling up or over the internet, because you end up getting, particularly with calls, you end up getting surges to particular services that then can't be managed by that one service, and unless you're coordinating better, I think it's really impossible to meet that demand. So I think one of the key focuses that became clear for us is our need to work with the sector, CLCs, Tenants Victoria, Consumer Affairs, and all our key stakeholders proactively and not really taking for granted that clients will find the right place if we're all out there. And then I think the second thing, which kind of goes hand in hand with that, is kind of consistent legal information. So I think a lot of the demand that we're seeing is because people don't know what their rights are, and they're people who are used to being able to go online and working it out. And a lot of the reason for that is, one, the laws change suddenly, and there's lots of new payments you can access and that type of thing. But then the second reason is because it's been really quite a short timeline to respond and coordinate getting that information. So those have been two key reflections for us, and I guess a lot of the work over the last 6 weeks has been trying to resolve those issues and ensure that from a client perspective, people can get the information they need easily and quickly, and that we triage in a way that so we can provide the service intensity that each client requires, so that the clients who can't represent themselves are still getting representation, and the clients who can get the resources they need. Yeah.
And I understand you've developed a facility where people can upload documents easily on their phones or through their phones, and that also facilitates, you know, a sort of smoother provision of legal assistance. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So particularly in tenancy matters, we really need to see the documents. I think it's probably the same for everybody, but there's some crucial documents that you need very quickly from tenants who don't have access to scanners. And we are hoping to roll it out next week, but it's looking really promising, and I think it's going to make that work really well.
I think the thing I'd like to add is just in terms of the court, the family court has been very responsive to the pandemic. It's moved to remote hearings. It did it very quickly. They are actually conducting hearings by Teams. So they're doing it by that way, and also conducting hearings by phone, which has been a great initiative of the court. I think it's what we've also learned is the court has always said, no, you have to be there, you have to do it this way. But what we've discovered through this is that that doesn't have to be the case, that we can manage these things in other ways. And I think it's really taught us that we can be quite, we can think outside the square, and we can find new ways to manage the work. And also, I think in terms of our services, there are ways that we can use the technology to access more clients, especially in remote and regional areas where they might not necessarily be able to get a service.
Yes, I think you know, the revelations in this, in terms of the technological advances and comfort levels that people have with different platforms, will change the face of how we present, you know, options around justice. And that's one good thing that perhaps will come out of this, together, as you said, Miles, with the greater coordination across the sector. So thank you both, or thank you all very much indeed for your time today. It's been fascinating to get an insight into how one of our key legal assistance providers is operating under these particularly challenging circumstances. And we'll put all the contact details up on a slide at the end. But go well, and thank you again for the contribution you make to Victoria.
Thank you.
So that's Leanne Sinclair, Associate Director of Family Violence Response at VLA, Miles Browne from the Economic and Social Rights Program, Brigid Jenkins, who's Manager of Family Law Services, and Alice Cashen, who's Associate Director in Criminal Law. You've been watching the Law and You series for Law Week 2020.